she had $53 million in her bank account. But on New Year's Eve, she couldn't buy a table. Jennifer Mason stood in the doorway of Chateau Bleu, watching couples toast to new beginnings while she had nowhere to sit. Around her, champagne bubbled. Strangers kissed at midnight. Families laughed over dessert. And she, Jennifer Mason, the woman who'd built an empire from nothing, stood alone, holding a reservation that had somehow disappeared from their system. She didn't know it yet, but in exactly 4 minutes, a 6-year-old girl would change everything she thought she knew about success, connection, and what it means to truly be seen. The restaurant glowed with amber light, casting shadows across mahogany tables dressed in white linen. Jennifer's heels clicked against marble as she approached the host stand for the 3rd time. The maitre d', a thin man with silver-rimmed glasses, scrolled through his tablet with practiced indifference. "I'm very sorry, Miss Mason. I have no record of your reservation. And as you can see, we're completely full tonight." His eyes didn't meet hers. They never did anymore. Not since the Forbes article, not since the CNN interview, not since her face became synonymous with ruthless business tactics and hostile takeovers. She'd spent 20 years becoming someone people couldn't ignore. Now she'd give anything to be someone they actually wanted to know. Jennifer glanced around the dining room. Every table was occupied. Elderly couples shared quiet conversations. Young professionals laughed too loudly over wine. A family of 4 sang happy birthday off-key. Normal people, living normal lives, surrounded by people who chose to be with them, not because they needed something, not because they wanted a favor, but because they simply enjoyed their company. When was the last time someone had enjoyed hers? She couldn't remember. Her assistant had quit 2 weeks ago, crying in the elevator about toxic work environments. Her college roommate stopped returning calls after Jennifer missed her wedding to close a deal in Singapore. Even her mother's last words before the stroke had been, "You're gonna die alone in that glass tower, Jenny. And you'll have no one to blame but yourself." "Perhaps you could try calling next time to confirm," the maitre d' suggested, already turning toward the next couple in line. "We get quite busy on holidays." Jennifer felt heat rise in her chest, that familiar anger that had fueled 1,000 negotiations, crushed 100 competitors, and built a fortune that should have meant she never had to feel small again. But standing here in her $2,000 dress and diamond earrings, she felt exactly as small as she had at 16, when her father told her she wasn't pretty enough to rely on her looks, so she'd better get smart. Well, she'd gotten smart, and rich, and powerful, and completely, utterly alone. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Jennifer was turning to leave when she heard it. A small voice cutting through the ambient noise of clinking glasses and muted conversations. "Daddy, that lady looks sad." The words stopped her mid-step. She turned slowly. At a corner table sat a man and a little girl. The man was perhaps 40, with dark hair graying at the temples and eyes that held the particular exhaustion of someone who'd learned to carry more than their share. He wore a simple button-down shirt, slightly wrinkled, and his daughter, the girl who'd spoken, had her hair pulled back in 2 uneven ponytails, one higher than the other. The child's eyes met Jennifer's, direct and unafraid, filled with the kind of uncomplicated empathy that adults spend lifetimes trying to reclaim. "Sophia, it's not polite to point," the man said softly, but his gaze had followed his daughter's. For a moment, Jennifer saw herself through their eyes. A woman in expensive clothes standing alone in a crowded restaurant, trying very hard to pretend she wasn't about to cry. The man hesitated. His hand moved toward his daughter's shoulder, then stopped. Jennifer watched something shift in his expression. A decision being made in real time, the kind of choice that seems small in the moment but carries weight beyond measure. He raised his hand slightly, a gesture so subtle she almost missed it. "We have an extra chair," he said, "if you'd like to join us." The offer hung in the air between them, fragile as spun glass. Jennifer's first instinct was to decline, to summon her pride, walk out into the cold December night, and pretend this humiliation had never happened. But Sophia was smiling now, scooting her chair closer to her father's to make room, and something in Jennifer's chest cracked open. "I don't want to intrude," she heard herself say, even as her feet were already moving toward their table. "We insist," the man said, standing to pull out the chair. "I'm Michael Brooks. This is my daughter, Sophia." Sophia waved and Jennifer felt tears prick her eyes. Not from sadness, but from the shocking unfamiliarity of simple kindness. She sat down carefully, as if any sudden movement might shatter whatever strange grace had been extended to her. The table was small, intimate, set for 2. A children's menu lay half-colored beside Sophia's plate, a purple crayon rolling near the edge. Michael's meal was barely touched. Pasta that had gone cold, while he'd helped his daughter cut her chicken. These were not people who belonged in Chateau Bleu, Jennifer realized. Not because they didn't deserve to be here, but because places like this weren't designed for little girls who colored while they ate, or single fathers who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. "Thank you," Jennifer said, and meant it more than any words she'd spoken in years. "I'm Jennifer." "Nice to meet you, Jennifer," Sophia said with the careful politeness of a child been taught her manners. "Are you here all by yourself?" The question was innocent, but it hit Jennifer like a physical blow. Was she here by herself? She'd been by herself for so long she'd forgotten what the alternative looked like. "I am," she said slowly. "My plans fell through at the last minute." It wasn't exactly a lie. She'd made the reservation months ago, back when she'd still believed her assistant when she said they were friends. Back before she realized the woman only smiled because she was paid to. Sophia nodded sagely as if this made perfect sense. "That happens sometimes. Daddy says when plans change, it just means something better is waiting." Michael's expression flickered with something Jennifer couldn't quite read. Grief, maybe, or the memory of grief. "That's what we tell ourselves," he said quietly. He poured water into Jennifer's glass from the carafe, his movements careful and deliberate. Sophia wanted to come here tonight. Her mother loved this place. The past tense landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples outward. Her mother loved, not loves, loved. Jennifer looked at Sophia again, seeing her with new clarity. The way she sat very straight in her chair, the way her eyes darted occasionally to her father's face to check if he was okay, the way her smile was just a little too bright. This was a child who'd learned to be brave when brave was the only option. "I'm sorry," Jennifer said, and the words felt inadequate. Michael nodded once, accepting the sympathy without comment. They sat in silence for a moment, the noise of the restaurant swirling around them like water around stones. Then Sophia picked up her crayon again. "Do you like coloring?" she asked Jennifer. "I'm making a picture of fireworks for after dinner." She pushed the children's menu across the table. Half the page showed an elaborate scene, purple and gold bursts filling a black sky, stick figures holding hands below. "It's beautiful," Jennifer said, and meant it. "Are these you and your dad?" Sophia nodded. "And Mommy. She's the one with the yellow hair. She's watching from heaven." She said it matter-of-factly the way children do when they've integrated impossible truths into their daily reality. "She died last year. But Daddy says she still loves us, even if we can't see her." Jennifer's throat tightened. She thought of her own mother, dying alone in a sterile hospital room, while Jennifer was across the country at a board meeting. She'd arrived 2 hours too late, and the guilt had been a constant companion ever since. "I'm sure she does," Jennifer said softly, "and I think she'd be very proud of this drawing." Sophia beamed, and Jennifer felt something shift inside her chest, a loosening of some long-held tension she hadn't known she was carrying. Michael cleared his throat. "So, Jennifer, what brings you out on New Year's Eve, besides non-existent reservations?" There was no judgment in his voice, only curiosity. Jennifer considered lying, inventing a story about friends who'd canceled, or a date who'd stood her up. But sitting here with these two strangers who'd shown her more genuine kindness in 5 minutes than she'd received in 5 years, lying felt impossible. "Honestly," she said, "I didn't want to be alone. I spend every New Year's Eve alone, and I thought this year would be different. I thought if I made a reservation at the nicest restaurant in the city, wore my best dress, pretended hard enough, maybe I'd feel less lonely. But the reservation disappeared. And here I am, proving my mother right." Michael studied her with those tired, knowing eyes. "Your mother said you'd be lonely." Jennifer laughed, but it came out bitter. "Among other things, she said I chose money over people. She said I built a fortress instead of a life. And the worst part is, she wasn't wrong." She paused, surprised by her own honesty. Something about this night, this strange, unexpected intersection of lives, made pretending feel pointless. "I'm very successful," she continued. "I run a venture capital firm. I've helped launch 32 companies. I'm very good at making money. But I'm terrible at making friends. And even worse at keeping them." Sophia looked up from her coloring. "My teacher says money can't buy happiness. Can it buy friends?" The question was asked with genuine curiosity, no malice behind it. Jennifer felt her face flush. "No, sweetheart, it can't. I wish it could. It would make things much simpler." Michael's expression softened with something like sympathy. "For what it's worth," he said, "you're welcome at this table. No purchase necessary." It was a small joke, gently delivered, and Jennifer found herself laughing. Really laughing for the first time in months. "Thank you," she said again. "Both of you. You've already made this night better than I imagined it could be." The waiter appeared then, a young man with slicked back hair and a professional smile. He glanced at Jennifer with mild confusion. Clearly she hadn't been part of the original reservation, but said nothing. "Can I get you started with something to drink, ma'am?" Jennifer ordered wine, something expensive and French that she knew Michael probably couldn't afford. Then, catching herself, she added, "And whatever they having, it's on me." Michael opened his mouth to protest, but Jennifer held up a hand. "Please, let me. It's the least I can do." He hesitated, then nodded. "All right, but only if you let me order dessert for the table later." Sophia's been talking about the chocolate soufflé for weeks. As the evening unfolded, Jennifer learned pieces of their story. Michael taught history at a public high school in Brooklyn. He'd met his wife, Catherine, at a summer camp where they'd both worked as counselors. They'd married young, had Sophia within a year, and spent 7 years building a life full of small joys: Sunday morning pancakes, bedtime stories read in funny voices. Then Catherine started feeling tired. Then came the diagnosis: stage 4 pancreatic cancer, 9 months from diagnosis to death, most of it spent in hospitals or in their apartment, which Michael had transformed into a makeshift hospice. He'd taken a leave of absence from school. Catherine's mother had moved in to help, and Sophia, just 5 years old, had learned what it meant to say goodbye, slowly. "This restaurant was special to Catherine," Michael explained, his fork moving pasta around his plate without eating. "We came here on our first anniversary. It was wildly above our budget. We ate ramen for a month afterward to make up for it. But she said it was worth it. She loved the way the candles made everything look golden. She said it felt like being inside a jewelry box." He smiled at the memory, and Jennifer could see the ghost of the man he used to be. Before grief carved lines into his face, before single parenthood taught him to function on 4 hours of sleep, before he learned to carry his wife's absence like a stone in his pocket. Sophia asked if we could come back. I almost said no, too many memories, you know? But then I thought, Catherine would want us to be here. She'd want us to remember the good parts. Jennifer listened, and for the first time in years, she wasn't thinking about herself. She was thinking about this man who had lost everything, and still found the strength to wave a stranger over to his table. She was thinking about this little girl who colored pictures of her mother watching from heaven, and asked sad women if they wanted to join dinner. She was thinking about Catherine, who'd loved this restaurant and had no idea that a decade after her anniversary, her family would be here with a billionaire who couldn't buy a table. What would Catherine have made of this night? Would she have approved of her husband's kindness? Would she have wanted her daughter to grow up believing in gestures like this? Small acts of compassion that asked nothing in return. "What about you?" Michael asked, pulling Jennifer from her thoughts. "What's your story?" "And I don't mean the Forbes version. I mean the real one. How does someone end up building an empire and spending New Year's Eve alone?" It was a fair question, asked without cruelty. Jennifer took a long sip of wine, considering how much to reveal. But Sophia was watching her with those earnest eyes, and Michael had just shared his deepest wound, and somehow it felt safe to be honest. "I grew up in Connecticut," she began. "Wealthy family but not happy. My father was a lawyer who worked 80 hours a week. My mother was a socialite who drank too much. They stayed married because divorce was embarrassing, not because they loved each other. I learned early that people were transactional. You gave them what they needed, and they gave you what you wanted. Affection was conditional. Approval had to be earned." She paused, remembering the house she'd grown up in. All marble and silence, rooms that echoed because no one ever laughed loud enough to fill them. "I put myself through business school," she continued. "Started my first company at 26. Sold it at 30 for $20 million. Started the next one. Then the next. Each time, I told myself I was building security. I was making sure I'd never need anyone. But somewhere along the way, not needing anyone turned into not having anyone. I stopped returning calls, missed weddings, forgot birthdays. And now everyone I used to know has moved on. They have families, lives, and I have money. So much money I could buy this entire restaurant if I wanted to. But I can't buy what I actually need." Sophia had stopped coloring. She was looking at Jennifer with an expression far too wise for a 6-year-old. "What do you need?" she asked simply. Jennifer felt her eyes sting. "I need what you have," she said quietly. "People who love me without needing a reason. People who'd invite me to dinner, even though I'm a stranger. People who see me as a person, not a bank account or a business opportunity." She laughed softly, wiping at her eyes. "Sorry, that was probably too heavy for New Year's Eve dinner." But Michael shook his head. "No, it's honest, and honesty is the only thing worth having." He reached across the table and squeezed her hand once briefly. It was the first time anyone had touched her with affection in longer than she could remember. The meal continued. Sophia told jokes she'd learned at school. Terrible, wonderful jokes that made no sense, but made them all laugh anyway. Michael talked about his students, the bright ones who reminded him why he loved teaching and the struggling ones who broke his heart. Jennifer found herself sharing stories too, about the entrepreneurs she'd funded, the ideas that had failed spectacularly, the one time she'd invested in a company making flavored toothpaste and lost $2 million. They laughed together, passed bread, refilled water glasses, and for a few hours they were just three people sharing a meal. Not a widow's family and a lonely billionaire. Just Michael, Sophia, and Jennifer, suspended in the warm amber light of Chateau Bleu while the city prepared to celebrate another year. When the waiter brought dessert, the chocolate soufflé Sophia had been dreaming about, along with 2 additional plates, they ate in comfortable silence. Sophia got chocolate on her nose. Michael took a picture on his phone. Jennifer felt something unlock inside her chest, some doors she'd kept bolted for decades swinging open. She thought about her mother's words, "You're going to die alone in that glass tower." Maybe that had been her trajectory. Maybe it still was. But tonight, for the first time in years, dying alone didn't feel inevitable. It felt like a choice, one she'd been making every day, and one she could choose to stop making. "Thank you," she said, as they finished dessert, "for inviting me to join you. You didn't have to do that." Michael smiled. Catherine always said the best nights are the unplanned ones. I think she was right. Sophia nodded enthusiastically. "Are you going to be less sad now?" she asked Jennifer. It was such a direct question, asked with such unguarded hope, that Jennifer almost laughed. "I think I might be," she said, "at least for tonight." And she meant it. For the first time in years, she felt something other than the dull ache of ambition. She felt seen, welcomed, human. As midnight approached, the restaurant filled with anticipation. Waiters distributed champagne flutes. Couples moved closer together. Families gathered near the windows overlooking the city. Michael lifted Sophia onto his lap so she could see. Jennifer stood beside them, her expensive dress suddenly feeling less like armor and more like costume. Outside, fireworks began to explode over the Manhattan skyline, gold and silver and purple bursts of light painting the night. Sophia squealed with delight. Michael's eyes were bright with unshed tears, and Jennifer knew he was thinking of Catherine, of every New Year's Eve they'd spent together, of the last one when she'd been too weak to leave her bed, but had insisted they celebrate anyway. And Jennifer, who'd spent 52 New Year's Eves focused on what she didn't have, found herself grateful for what she did. This moment, this unexpected connection, this reminder that she was still capable of feeling something other than ambition's hollow ache. The countdown began. 10, 9, 8. Strangers linked arms. 7, 6, 5. Sophia grabbed Jennifer's hand on one side, her father's on the other. 4, 3, 2, 2. Michael's voice was thick when he whispered, "Happy New Year, Catherine." 1. The restaurant erupted in cheers. Sophia shouted "Happy New Year" at the top of her lungs, and Jennifer, who hadn't cried in public since her mother's funeral, felt tears stream down her face, not from sadness, but from the shocking relief of connection. "Happy New Year," Michael said, turning to Jennifer with a smile that didn't quite hide his grief. "Happy New Year," she replied. They stood together at the window, watching the fireworks fade and the city settle back into its normal rhythm. Around them, couples kissed and friends embraced and families made promises they'd try to keep. And at their small corner table, 3 people who'd been strangers hours ago felt something rare and precious take root. The beginning of something none of them had known they needed. Jennifer thought about the maitre d' who'd turned her away, about the reservation that had vanished, about every small humiliation that had led her to this moment. And she felt, for perhaps the first time in her life, grateful for rejection. Because if she'd gotten her table for one, she would have eaten alone. She would have watched other people celebrate while nursing her second glass of wine and feeling sorry for herself. She would have learned nothing, felt nothing, changed nothing. Instead, she'd met Michael and Sophia. She'd been invited into their grief and their hope. She'd been reminded that kindness still existed, that some people still waved strangers over to their table for no reason other than they looked sad. Before they left, Jennifer did something impulsive. She pulled out her phone and typed quickly. "I'd like to see you both again," she said. "If that's okay. Maybe coffee next week? Or lunch? I could come to Brooklyn." She said it too fast, afraid they'd refuse. Afraid this night was all she'd get. But Michael smiled. "We'd like that," he said. "Wouldn't we, Sophia?" Sophia nodded vigorously. "Will you bring your coloring book?" Jennifer asked. "Always," Sophia said seriously. They exchanged numbers, made tentative plans, promised to text. And when Jennifer finally walked out of Chateau Bleu into the cold January air, she wasn't alone anymore. She had 2 new names in her phone. 2 people who'd invited her into their lives without asking for anything in return. 2 reminders that connection wasn't transactional, that family wasn't always blood, that belonging could begin with something as simple as a 6-year-old saying, "Daddy, That lady looks sad. 6 months later, Jennifer would stand in Sophia's school gymnasium watching her receive an award for a creative writing piece. Michael would be beside her, their shoulders touching, and she'd realize somewhere along the way they'd become something more than friends. A year after that, she'd help Sophia with her homework at Michael's kitchen table while he made dinner, and it would feel more like home than any penthouse ever had. 2 years later, on New Year's Eve, they'd return to Chateau Bleu. This time with a reservation that didn't disappear, this time as a family, and sitting at that same corner table where everything had changed. Jennifer would lift her glass and say, "To Catherine, for teaching your family to wave strangers over, for knowing that the best nights are unplanned, for making this possible." But that night, that first night, Jennifer only knew she'd been given something she didn't deserve and hadn't earned. Grace, maybe, or luck, or whatever force in the universe decides that sometimes, when you've lost your way, a stranger will offer you a chair at their table. She walked to the corner and hailed a cab. Behind her, the restaurant glowed like a jewelry box, full of lives intersecting and moments blooming in possibilities she was only beginning to understand. The cab pulled up. Jennifer got in. "Where to?" the driver asked. She gave her address, then paused. "Actually," she said, "take the long way. I'm not in a hurry." Because for the first time in decades, Jennifer Mason had something worth savoring. Not success or wealth or power, but something infinitely more valuable. She had been seen by two people who asked. She had been welcomed. She had been chosen, not for what she could provide, but for who she was beneath all the armor. And as the cab wound through the city streets, past crowds of revelers and darkened storefronts and glowing apartment windows where people celebrated with those they loved, Jennifer finally understood what her mother had been trying to tell her. Money couldn't buy happiness. But kindness could build it. Connection could nurture it. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, a little girl would notice you standing alone and say the words that changed everything. "Daddy, that lady looks sad." Jennifer pulled out her phone and looked at the contact she'd just added. Michael Brooks. Sophia's dad. She thought about texting, then stopped. There would be time for that tomorrow. For now, it was enough to know they existed. That somewhere in Brooklyn, a single father was tucking his daughter into bed and telling her about the kind lady they'd met at dinner. That somewhere, a little girl was adding a new figure to her fireworks drawing. A woman with dark hair standing between her and her father, all of them holding hands beneath the golden bursts of light. And that somewhere inside Jennifer's carefully constructed fortress, a crack had appeared. Not wide enough to collapse the walls entirely, but wide enough to let light in. Wide enough to let hope in. Wide enough to suggest that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to build something better than an empire. Maybe it wasn't too late to build a life. The cab turned onto her street. Jennifer looked up at her building, 53 floors of glass and steel rising into the night sky. Her penthouse waited at the top, all marble and silence and expensive art that no one ever saw. She could go upstairs, pour another glass of wine, stand at her window overlooking the city, and feel exactly as alone as she'd felt every other New Year's Eve. Or she could do something different. She could text Michael, thank him again, ask about Sophia's bedtime routine, share the name of that children's book she'd loved as a girl, the one about the lonely star who found a constellation. Small steps, careful steps, the kind of steps people take when they're learning to trust something new. Jennifer paid the driver and stepped out into the cold. Behind her, the city celebrated. Ahead of her, the building rose like a monument to everything she'd achieved, and everything she'd lost in the achieving. She stood for a moment in between, neither moving forward nor back, just breathing in the sharp January air and feeling grateful. Grateful for a reservation that had disappeared. Grateful for a maitre d' who hadn't recognized her name. Grateful for a 6-year-old's empathy and a father's courage and a dead woman's legacy of kindness. Grateful that sometimes, when you're standing alone in the doorway of your own life, someone waves you over and says, "We have an extra chair." She pulled out her phone and typed, "Thank you for tonight. It meant more than you know. Coffee next week?" She hit send before she could second-guess herself. Then she walked into her building, rode the elevator to the 53rd floor, and opened the door to her empty penthouse. But tonight, the silence felt different, less permanent, less inevitable. Tonight, the silence felt like a pause, a brief intermission before the next act began, and when her phone buzzed with Michael's reply, "We'd love that. Sophia's already planning what to tell you." Jennifer smiled, really smiled. The kind of smile that reaches your eyes and stays there, the kind you can't fake or force, the kind that only comes when something real and true and unexpected breaks through the loneliness you've been calling safety. She could text Michael, thank him again, ask about Sophia's bedtime routine, share the name of that children's book she'd loved as a girl, the one about the lonely star who found a constellation. Small steps, careful steps, the kind of steps people take when they're learning to trust something new. Jennifer paid the driver and stepped out into the cold. Behind her, the city celebrated. Ahead of her, the building rose like a monument to everything she'd achieved, and everything she'd lost in the achieving. She stood for a moment in between, neither moving forward nor back, just breathing in the sharp January air and feeling grateful. Grateful for a reservation that had disappeared. Grateful for a maitre d' who hadn't recognized her name. Grateful for a 6-year-old's empathy and a father's courage and a dead woman's legacy of kindness. Grateful that sometimes, when you're standing alone in the doorway of your own life, someone waves you over and says, "We have an extra chair." She pulled out her phone and typed, "Thank you for tonight. It meant more than you know. Coffee next week?" She hit send before she could second-guess herself. Then she walked into her building, rode the elevator to the 53rd floor, and opened the door to her empty penthouse. But tonight, the silence felt different, less permanent, less inevitable. Tonight, the silence felt like a pause, a brief intermission before the next act began, and when her phone buzzed with Michael's reply, "We'd love that. Sophia's already planning what to tell you." Jennifer smiled, really smiled. The kind of smile that reaches your eyes and stays there, the kind you can't fake or force, the kind that only comes when something real and true and unexpected breaks through the loneliness you've been calling safety. So here's my question for you. Who's the stranger you've been too proud to notice? Who's the person standing alone that you could wave over? And what would happen if you did? Think about it. Because somewhere tonight, someone's reservation is disappearing. Someone's standing in a doorway watching other people celebrate. Someone's convincing themselves they're fine alone when what they really need is for someone to say, "We have an extra chair." Maybe that someone is you. Maybe you're the one who needs to be waved over. Or maybe you're the one who needs to do the waving. Either way, I hope you're brave enough to take the chance. Because the best nights, the ones that change everything, are always the unplanned ones. Always. Summer.